to Beyond Well. And as many of you know, this is a program where we talk a lot about our interior lives. And first of all, the warmest welcome to Brian, who just recovered from 3 weeks of the chicken pox.
2 weeks of chicken pox.
Holy.
Oh, wow.
Which is crazy. Like, how did I go so long without it? So I'm working on trying to get an ear infection and croup now, just to get like the trifecta of childhood illnesses.
Are you going to get your tonsils out next week too, Brian?
The best thing is that I can definitely catch up on Netflix through you, right?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've definitely... The monthly fee, I have made it well worth it in the last 2 weeks. I'm so sick of television.
And Dr. Jenna Lejeune joins us always, like, with the brightest, beautiful colors.
Oh, thank you
So good to see you,
much.
Jenna. You know what? Cheryl Strayed was one of our very first guests on this show, and I'm so thrilled to have her back. But I'm kind of over the moon to have Mr. Sugar in the studio as well. Brian Lindstrom.
Oh,
Brian
thank you.
is a fabulous filmmaker, and Cheryl and Brian just united on a filmmaking project that we're going to talk a lot more about in just a moment. But I wanted to start with the idea that we could talk, especially to younger people who are looking perhaps for a life partner, about how you partner with purpose. And you said you have a meme for me or something you're going to say about that, Cheryl?
Well, I was trying to figure out, how to find a partner with purpose instead of Tinder. There should be a special app
Right.
for and there isn't an app for that. You have to in real life through trial and error. But one thing I will tell you that from the very beginning, one of the reasons that I fell in love with Brian, and I think one of the reasons he fell in love with me, is we did have that sense that we understood each other's mission. That we both said, I was like, I'm a writer, and at this time we were at the beginning of our careers essentially.
Yeah.
I didn't have a book published. He was working on. He had made a short film or two, but was still very much becoming.
Yeah.
And we felt that sense of connection for each other and compassion for each other. We knew how hard it was to have to find jobs to pay the rent, but while doing that work on the side. And I immediately felt known by him and understood and recognized.
Yeah, and to find someone who had that similar sense of calling and dedication and focus and understood the choices you were making that for some people are very strange.
Yeah.
You guys met 9 days after Cheryl finished her hike, correct?
That's right.
And you immediately slept together, as I would, as anybody in this room would. But then I want you to each describe, like they do in The Affair, you describe your way about talking about this, and now you describe your way of talking about it. What happened right after that you made the choice to hold off for a while?
Right. So we slept together, and then we didn't sleep together for 6 weeks. So I always say, Brian is the last person I regret having slept with. So Brian, why don't you
go first?
You go first.
Wow.
Tell him what happened.
Well, on September 24th,
1995.
He remembers the day.
Oh, yeah.
Is
I
when we
can
met.
remember the hour. At 8 o'clock, my good friend Tom Kilbane had invited me to go out to dinner with him, and he said, "Oh, by the way, we're going to meet this woman I just met,
At a
Cheryl,
garage sale.
At a garage sale." Yeah. And one thing about Tom, he's a lovely guy, but he's always late. And so by the time
Always.
he picked me up, it's like 8:30. And to make a long story short, as we were walking in, they were walking out.
We met in the doorway.
And so instantly, Cheryl kind of had an attitude like, "What the hell? Who are you to make me wait?" And I didn't even know we were late because I didn't know what time Tom told them to be there.
And so we sat down and we had dinner, and we went and saw a show, and we talked that night. And
and she had told me that she'd hiked the Pacific Crest Trail, which I'm not even sure I even knew the name of then. And I just thought, wow, you did what? I got to know this person.
And he told me I should write about it. And I said, nah, I don't have anything to say
Clearly.
about it.
Yeah, clearly.
But then, so what happened is that night we liked each other, and he gave me his phone number. You guys are getting the whole story.
I love it.
He gave me his phone number and on this little piece of paper, and it sat in the windowsill of my room. I had this little room with a futon on the floor, and one night I had candles lit all over my room, and that little piece of paper with his phone number, which is still our home phone number, blew. I opened the window and it blew from the windowsill into the flame of the candle and burned into thin air. And I looked him up in the phone book. There used to be phone books.
The white pages.
And I called that number and I got Brian's voicemail and I said, we met the last week and this funny thing happened and I think we should see each other again. And so we did. We had dinner and we
decided just to kind of get to know each other.
No, that's the night you jumped me.
I thought I jumped you the first night.
No, you did not.
I wanted to jump you the first night.
Brian,
in my fantasy, I jumped you the
We've
first
been
night.
together so long. Don't you remember? We go back to my apartment.
You're right.
And he said, we were sitting in my bed on the floor. And
I basically gave her my "Don't go loving me, babe" kind of line.
Yeah. He said, listen, I like you, but I'm not looking for a relationship. And I said, that's fine. We can just be friends. And as soon as that word was out of my mouth, he literally like pounced on top of me. I mean, this was before like consent was really teased out. He like pounced on top of me. He was like one of those like guys who are really good at pickpocketing or whatever, but except in the other.
Welcome to Beyond Well, Brian.
But anyway, I was clearly happy. So anyway, we slept together, and I had hiked the Pacific Crest Trail and come to a lot of deep, really conclusions about like what was happening in my life. And one of the things that I realized is I was having sex too easily with too many people.
Yeah.
And I did it again with this guy named Brian Lindstrom.
Yeah.
And I woke up in the morning. It was like 7 a.m. And I remember waking up and looking at him. We're on my little twin-sized futon, snuggled together. And I asked him, I said, do you regret what we did last night? And he said no. And I knew he was lying when he said no. I knew he was. Like, I recognized that he too, like, he didn't want to hurt my feelings, but that actually, I just felt like a partner. Like, I felt like I identified with him, that he was also doing what I had been doing, and that he was sort of at the end of the road with that too.
Wow.
And I said, I just wasn't wanting to do this, right now in my life again. And so he got up and left. I mean, we were like, let's be friends or whatever. And he left. And then I felt all the ways that you feel when you've had sex when you probably shouldn't have. Just that sense of like, ugh, here we go again. And then now I can't be friends with this guy because it's awkward because we slept together and then I regret it. And, and so then shortly after that, Brian, just started reaching out to me and actually being my friend.
Yeah, and I'm so glad I did.
And we decided that we would not, that we would be friends, that we wouldn't be physical.
Right.
The thing that I love about this story is that so many young people nix their best friends as potential partners.
Right.
I hear it all the time that they say, there's no way that I can actually date that guy because I've been such good friends with him. He's my best friend. I love him so much. He's my best friend. But there's like this line. And I want you guys to speak to this because one of the things that I think is fascinating is that the marriages that last are those that have a ton of respect and friendship involved.
Oh, sure.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to last 20, 30, 40 years, there also has to be that more kind of soul connection, that friendship.
Yeah.
Like you enjoy being together and spending time together, and you're connected around some of these bigger, in my language, values of things.
Did you speak about your values early on while you were becoming friends?
Well, I remember that we would have great walks and go on runs and talk about everything. And then I invited Cheryl to go to Hermiston with me, where I was working on a project with Mexican kids there, a video project.
Immigrants.
And it seemed like a turning point, that trip.
Right. I watched Brian working with these teenagers who are immigrants and who lived in Hermiston and were making a life there. And the way it was all these teenage girls and just the gentle way that Brian talked to them and how much they loved him and admired him and just everything that he had dedicated his life to. And that's what we did. So during those 6 weeks, between the time we had sex until the next time we had sex,
Which so much tension.
We fell in love, but we fell in love without forefronting the erotic.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it seems like so oftentimes people will get friend zoned, like, I got in the friend zone. And you get in that friend role because, apparently she's not interested or I'm not interested. Because if you are interested, why don't you put that cart before the horse?
Yeah.
Right? And so if you are delaying the erotic, it's because you're not interested, instead of what you all did, which was like, no, I intentionally want to develop something here so that what I'm drawn to is not just how you make me feel or how great your body works with my body, but like, I love how you are in the world. When you watched him, right? It's like, I just love this man and how he does things.
Yeah, and that's super interesting what you said there, Cheryl, because I don't think it had dawned on me before when I hear stories about people who will sort of say, I kind of knew. I knew this was the person for me. It's very, very frequently around something like, I saw them work or I saw them do this thing that brought out a value. And as soon as I saw that, I know that's the case for me with my partner. As soon as I saw that, I was like, yes, that's what I want in my life. And it was kind of the same thing of seeing Brian working there and how he was interacting with these young women.
When I fell in love with you because of your love for Cheryl was when I was taking a class from Cheryl and watched you listen to every word she had to say. And I can imagine you've probably been to how many speeches? Thousands, tens of thousands maybe at this point. And he was your best student.
Yeah.
And I was like, even after, is it 20 years of marriage?
Yeah, we've been married 20 years together, 24.
20 years of marriage, you're still learning from her, you're still learning from him.
Yeah.
I always, I mean, I never tire of hearing what Cheryl has to say.
I just
except when it's critical of me, then I get tired of it.
He's the thing is, one of the things I would say that's really true and helps us stay so connected is we both really admire each other truly.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, Jenna, you were talking about that whole best friend or what it means to be intimate. And I think it's fascinating. Like when we ask somebody, well, have you been intimate with each other?
Yeah.
What we mean is, have you had sex with each other? And what happened with me and Brian is we had sex with each other without any intimacy. And then we decided not to have sex, and we became deeply intimate over 6 weeks of getting to know each other. We went on long walks, as Brian said. We sat in my apartment and read pages of the dictionary out loud to each other and talked about words and played games. We played word games. It was so sort of old-fashioned, and we did all of these things together that were all about deepening our intimacy.
You read your first short story to me?
That's right. I read my short story out loud to him. And he
I don't
showed me
think
his
I've
first...
ever been so nervous. Like so deeply wanting something to be good. and so grateful that it was that it was beyond good. It was fantastic. It was great.
Imagine how she must feel watching your films. I mean, the first time she did, you
same
say,
thing.
Right, it's a documentary filmmaker. He could have been really bad at what he did.
Right.
Instead, you're really one of the most purposeful, beautiful documentary filmmakers that I've ever witnessed,
thank
Brian.
you, Sheila. I
First of all,
appreciate
I
that.
love the topics that you take on, from the life of a mentally ill man who was killed by the Portland police, to the work that you've done with women in prison, to what you're doing now with these women in Nepal. It's like everything that you could hope for in a boyfriend / husband / documentary filmmaker, right?
But can we I want to talk, we talked about the beginning of the relationship, which granted, I do in retrospect look back and think there were a lot of things that we did right and we truly fell madly in love with each other and everything. But that's not when it's hard. That's not when the going gets tough.
That's right.
So let's talk about being, having those intentions and shared missions, individual missions, and trying to support each other when you're 10 years into the relationship and you have no money and you have 2 babies like we did. And I'll tell you this, I always feel so sure that really the reason that I've been able to have a career as a writer and Brian's been able to have a career as a documentary filmmaker is that we have each other. because there are so many times that we both said, okay, the reasonable thing to do, and not just we said to ourselves, but everyone around us said, the reasonable thing to do would be to give this up and just get a real job, because you're broke, you have the kids to support, and there are no good reasons to continue this route. And Brian would always say to me, just keep going, and he still says it to me, just keep doing this, Cheryl. I believe in you. Wow. And I do the same to him.
When and when you have kids, suddenly that sense of like, oh my God, am I being irresponsible by following my dream?
Yeah.
Is that, am I making my kids pay for that, in some way? I'll never forget, at kind of like the depths of our financial crisis, when I would be done editing at nighttime, I would sneak onto the internet and like look on Craigslist for jobs. And I got offered one. It was like for an advertising agency that I won't name. And, it had, benefits and paid, a decent amount of money. And I kind of sheepishly told Cheryl, well, I think I should do this. And I'll never forget. She said, if you take that job, I will divorce you. You will be miserable, and it's not what you're meant to do. You are not taking that job. And I mean, my God, I can't ask for more support or guidance than that, or wisdom.
He was like, "You're crazy, but okay." But
you're crazy, but thank you.
He would be miserable.
See, there's I love what you're saying, because we spend so much of our time and focusing on what kind of a partner do we want? Like, all of these apps are all about, like, do I like that person? Swipe right, swipe left. It's all about the other person. And what you two are talking about, and something that I'm often talking about with my clients, is focus on your values, you being the person that you want to be, and then find a partner who is going to help you shine. So I use the analogy of, it's like salt in chocolate. It's like, chocolate by itself is good, but you put just a tiny little bit of salt in the chocolate and it just tastes more chocolatey. So you want to find somebody that is the salt to your chocolate. The two of you don't have exactly the same life pursuits, but you both have this commitment to helping the other person be their best self, be their most chocolatey self. And that's what helps, I think, a relationship be so solid. It's really beautiful to see.
So I want to ask you about when you have the kids and you have these incredibly busy lives. And Cheryl, your schedule, I mean, I just watch it. You are all over the world. And Brian, your schedule is really, really difficult. What does a daily life look like? Do you get up? Do you have a shared calendar? Are you saying this goal is important for me? Here's how we're going to handle that. Do you actually have to run your marriage in some ways as a business in order to help each other achieve your goals?
Well, it never seems that
formal.
Yeah.
If it's a business, we're about to go bankrupt.
Okay.
I love how it's like, let's see, we get up. No, but I know what you're saying. And the way we make it work is, I mean, we share everything. I mean, that's the thing too. It's like we're really co-parents together, and we shared our domestic labor, and we're very much like, what do you need this week? What do you need to do? Right now, Brian's in deep editing mode with his documentary about the musician Judy Sell. And so he's been in his basement office a lot, and in a way that makes our family kind of uncomfortable. Yeah. Because we're used to having him serve us more. And so, and then other times where it's like, then I'm the stressor because I'm gone for 2 weeks,
right.
And then it's all on Brian. And, who's going to do the kid pickups? Who's going to do what happens to the dog? Could we have 2 dogs and 2 cats? And every week, one of them needs to go to the vet.
Exactly.
Somebody's barfing.
We're constantly, it's a constant conversation. And we just engage with it daily. We're in the pit together, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. And it was much more challenging when the kids were, smaller, and it required constant care. I'll never forget when Cheryl was doing the rewrites on Wild. I've never seen a kind of better example of just like discipline and grace under fire. I mean, our kids would always like have the flu or some damn thing, and we'd be up all night, and she would just like find these like 40 minutes of free time, and then go down in the basement and suddenly get into this like focused writing zone, and then come out of that and go back up into the domestic fray.
Wow.
And because I think a lot of time we have this idea of like the artist, or especially the writer, kind of having this kind of, process where I get, she was just like, fuck it, I got 40 minutes, I'm going to write this, and it was just so inspiring to see that.
Yeah. I want to loop back to the idea of being supportive and the chocolate salt sort of thing. It seems to me like some people who are listening might think, all right, well, what I have to do is really like white knuckle my support of my partner. Like, it's okay, I just have to be really supportive. And what I'm picking up from the two of you is there's that in the face of, financial stressors and logistical problems. But there's also this, I know my partner, I see them, and this is what fulfills them. Mm-hmm. And they need to do this to be their richest, fullest self. And then maybe in addition to that, it's, I believe in their pursuit. This is not some harebrained, crazy, well, I guess this is what they like, so I'm just going to plug my nose and try to be a supportive partner. It's like, no, I really, and this is that kind of cut from the same cloth.
Yeah.
You do different things, but I see it as different vehicles for the same values. And so it's like, I believe in you. I believe in this is what you need to do, and I believe that you can do it. And I also believe that it's important that it's done. You know? Like I am jacked about what you do, and you need to do this for you, for me, for everyone who's going to benefit from it. It's not just, I think, like, all right, I got to write this down. Be supportive of my partner.
Yeah,
okay,
totally.
I'll work on that.
No. I was thinking about this. You were an author and you were a filmmaker, and now you're a filmmaker.
I know.
So
look at me.
Yeah.
So when's your book coming out, right?
But what was that conversation like? Because I can imagine in some ways the whole thing you talked about, like, ooh, I hope she's good. Same thing, right?
Right.
You're inviting her into your world. You're coming into Brian's world for the first time. But the topic, to Brian's point, the other Brian, is that this topic that you undertook with these girls in Nepal was so devastatingly important to the world. And so I want you to first describe this conversation that you had around this idea and why you decided to do it jointly.
Well, I must say it doesn't feel like a huge departure. I mean, even though, like, Cheryl wasn't officially, part of, Finding Normal or Alien Boy or Mothering Inside. I always, she's always my first kind of audience. I so value like showing her rough cuts and getting feedback, or even like during the kind of process of making a film, kind of discussing with her what's going on and who seems to be the main character and, what I think the story might be. And so it wasn't like a huge departure where all of a sudden it's like, oh, who's this person I'm working with? It just felt like a natural extension. And this project in Nepal, we had the privilege of meeting these young women on our trip there the year before, and we kind of knew we wanted to do something with them, and they were very clear about, the stigma of chapati and what it meant in their lives. And so we pretty much knew we wanted to make a film about that, and it just was very natural and organic to make it together.
So, Cheryl, will you pick up and explain chapati?
Yeah. So chapati is the practice of banishing girls and women when they're menstruating, and also after childbirth. We didn't cover that in our film, but we kept it narrowly focused on the experience the teen girls that we featured in the film had. But yes, it's really a deeply, deeply held belief in Nepal that girls and women are toxic when they're bleeding. And this extends to really every aspect of their lives. So not only are girls and women actually banished from the home, they are not allowed to touch or consume pretty much any kind of food you can imagine. If you eat an apricot, the apricot tree will die. If you drink milk, the cow will die, or the goat, right? That's the thinking, because there's really strongly held beliefs around girls and women being, having that kind of power that they will contaminate things around them.
Yeah.
And Chapati is really, in most cases, used to express the most extreme end of menstrual stigma in Nepal, and that is really like banishing women for 2 weeks, to a cowshed or to the forest.
Yeah.
And there's also now like sort of tamer versions of Chapati that are very widely practiced in Nepal, even in cities like Kathmandu, where a girl will be confined to one room of the house or sent to her aunt's house while she's menstruating, essentially being ostracized and banished.
When you called it "We Are Forbidden," and it's the title is it's a perfect title, but the part of it that really I think was so hurtful to me was that the belief extends to a girl ruining the lives of her brothers and fathers if they see them during this period. And so even if there's like a chance meeting, the belief is that the father or the brother might die, correct?
Right, if the girl gazes upon the face of a male family member.
Wow. And the way this stigma is perpetuated primarily is through the role of the witch doctor in the community, who has a lot of power, and anything that goes wrong, like a cow dying or whatever, can oftentimes be blamed on, some family is not practicing Chapati correctly, and so there's this incredible pressure, even people that don't really believe it, to follow it, because they risk being ostracized.
So I was really, and to your point, Brian, I think it's so smart what you said around Cheryl's a brilliant storyteller. And in many ways, filmmaking is just the visual impact of a great story, right? How did you work? Was it in tandem when you were thinking like, we want the narrative to go like this? Did you have a big part in that, Cheryl?
Well, here's what happened. As Brian said, the first time we went to Nepal was November of 2017, and these teen girls were attending the school where Brian and I both taught a workshop called Coppola Valley School in Surkhet, Nepal, and they wanted to meet with us, and we just thought we'd meet with them and talk to them about their lives, and within just a few minutes, they all were telling us about Chapati and crying and talking about how humiliating it was and scary, and how they didn't want to have this imposed upon them anymore. And so the next year when we went back, the biggest challenge I think of telling this story was that this isn't our story to tell.
Yeah.
So we knew that we as white Americans did not want to make a film that was saying, America's so great and Nepal's doing bad stuff to women and girls,
right,
because of course we have our own issues here, right?
Yeah.
But what we did want to do is essentially provide the girls with the platform to tell their stories, these stories that would otherwise maybe never be told.
Right.
So that was our first idea, is really, how can I as a writer and writing teacher get the girls to tell their stories, and how can Brian as a director show that story, right? And so we just decided to collaborate, and that's what we did. We went on day one, we sat in a circle, and I asked the girls to write the story of their first period, what happened to them when they first got their periods, and they each wrote. It took a while actually to get them to do that, because they were so confused by this notion of actually writing down a personal story. They'd never been asked to write essentially a memoir about their lives. It took some convincing that their stories were worth telling. And finally, when they consented, I saw they handed all their papers to me. Some of them wrote in English, others wrote in Nepali, and I had the Nepali translated. And that's where Brian and I together made this sort of collage of stories that you hear in We Are Forbidden.
It's beautiful.
From these girls just telling you what happened to them. The power of what happened to you, cannot be overstated.
Was doing that challenging some of the girls' own belief that maybe they were toxic during that time, or are they all like, this is being imposed on me? Because it strikes me that if everybody believes that this is your condition while menstruating, that some of those girls have internalized that message, and then you all coming in and saying this is a completely okay thing to talk about is a strong counter message.
Yeah, and it's really the work, the fact that they are all attending school when most of their parents never attended school. And at Coppola Valley School, they teach the kids, girls and boys alike, that this is not true.
Okay.
You know, that girls and women don't need to be banished. And it's backed up a bit by the Nepali government. I mean, this is a time of real transition and change in Nepal. So the Supreme Court of Nepal has outlawed Chaupati.
I see.
And it's like one of those things where it's like it's illegal, but everyone does it because it is so entrenched. And so the answer to your question, how do the girls feel about it? They're at that crossroads. They're saying, you know what? I don't think I'm toxic when I'm menstruating.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that they don't still carry some fear and shame.
Sure.
And what was so interesting, so the girls have a social, like a counselor at their school, and she has a master's degree in social work. She's a therapist. Like she's all of these. She knows that Chaupati is not true, and yet one thing she said to me when we were talking privately about it, she said, I have to admit, even though I don't believe in any of this, when I'm visiting my parents, if I have my period, I go stay in one room because I just feel like, it feels uncomfortable not to obey those laws. And it's because it's, she was raised with those values. It's hard to completely shuck them off.
Well, and I think it's easy to see an example that is different than what most of us in the U.S. kind of our cultural background and see that as, oh my God, that's so bizarre that would happen. But of course, we all do the same thing, right? We have all internalized these stigmas and messages about ourselves. I mean, it's a big part of why we want to do this podcast is decreasing the stigma around mental health stuff. And yet, I'm a therapist, and I don't always talk about my mental health struggles openly and out loud.
Right.
So we all kind of internalize these things and have conflicting feelings about, well, I know that I shouldn't kind of buy into this stigma, but, and I think at least from my perspective, our humans' desire to belong is so incredibly strong that anything we do that feels like it's going to threaten us from belonging with our community feels literally like it's going to kill us. And so it's so inspiring to see these young women in your film doing this thing that is so courageous and speaking out when it must feel tremendously scary to them.
Right. They're opposing their parents and much of the community.
Yeah.
Because it's up for so many awards, and it will eventually find its way to a general public, I imagine, right? People can go on Netflix and see it eventually.
Well, it's on the New York. A shorter version of it is on the New York Times OpDoc page.
Yeah. But do you have a hope for it? I mean, with James Chassie, the police bureau brought in all these different changes with the women's prison. They were allowed to see their kids. I mean, the work of your documentaries, Brian, has been and you too, Cheryl, it's changed people's lives. It's changed laws. It's changed people for the better. What do you hope for?
Well, I'm hoping, I think what I would really love for this film is for us to be able to maybe have a screening in Kathmandu that the girls would go to.
Yeah.
And that we
what
could
a
all
great
be there,
dream.
in the audience and just have them really kind of absorb the audience's appreciation for their strength and their courage.
Wow.
This is the moment I just fell in love with Brian.
Yeah, everyone will have this.
all
Brian.
having a moment.
This is a classic. I'll just have you know, this is a classic Brian moment.
Oh my!
If Brian had his way, all of the people he's featured in his films would be living with us. So I've had to actually. He keeps going. Can't we just convert our garage into a little house? But anyway, I think that's that was one thing that was very interesting also about our collaboration. And I also feel like we have to give a little shout out to our son Carver Lindstrom,
Absolutely.
who did the sound on the film. So it was really a family affair.
Oh, wow.
While our daughter Bobby was, there's also a children's home associated with the school, and she was helping with the kids there. But so Carver was 14 when he did the sound. He's 15 now, but he's in this room all week with these girls talking about their periods. They all fell madly in love with him.
Of course. How could you not?
But, what happened that week was so extraordinary. First of all, to just tell the girls, yes, I do want to hear your story. Please write it down. And to have that sort of tangle with them where they didn't They really could not understand. It was lost in translation. Why would you want to know my story?
Yeah.
So just the power of them writing those stories. Then what we asked them to do is look straight into the camera and say in English the words that they had written down.
Right.
And this was such a difficult process.
Yeah. Oh, I can only imagine.
And then, of course, we're in Circuit. Like every time somebody finally got the line right, like a big motorcycle would come like zooming down the street, or there'd be some
chickens
big horn,
clucking.
and just that when we left Nepal, we were like, it doesn't matter if we have enough for a film here.
Yeah.
What happened with those girls, just to look straight into a camera and speak your truth, is a very
That's the
powerful
best.
act.
Wow, no kidding.
But I do hope. I mean, what I think of this film is a contribution to the conversation that's finally happening about menstrual stigma around the globe, and how this is really a human rights issue.
Yeah.
Women and girls menstruate, right? For really many years. I mean, how many years if you add it all up?
If a woman lives her whole life in Nepal, she can spend as much as 8 years living in a cowshed.
In Chappaday, yeah. And it's the number one menstrual stigma, not just in Nepal, but around the world. It's the number one reason for student absenteeism. It's the number one reason that girls don't finish school, because they're home, and then you stay home 1 week every 4 or 5. That adds up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
it really has actual economic consequences on girls and women. But one thing I was so struck by in We Are Forbidden, when we were listening back to what the language the girls used a lot, they kept saying humiliated, that they felt humiliated. They were too young to really know how this will have economic consequence for them someday, but that they felt shame.
Yeah.
And what happens to us, I mean, Brian and Jenna really can speak to this. What happens when shame is built into your identity, that you should be ashamed because
something
you
so
are
normal.
female?
Yeah, that is this core part of who you are.
Yeah.
Right.
And shame, we know that shame causes us to want to hide as well. Again, because of this idea that we want to be part of our community, and if there's something shameful about us, then we have to hide that from our community, or I'll get kicked out. Exactly. And so it's just getting reinforced. I mean, they're literally having a message. Yes, you have to hide because this thing is shameful.
And for something that is so core and fundamental to who you are, it isn't like, well, I got to get rid of this behavior. I got to stop doing this thing.
Right.
Because it makes me fundamentally bad. This is like, what am I supposed to do?
How about core and
built into who I am.
fundamental to the survival of the human species?
Right.
That's
Oh my
always just
there's that part of it.
Yeah,
Sure, yeah.
yeah.
Well, and girls and women die every year in Nepal because of Chappaday.
Right.
That's the
Right.
other thing that this really actually has real consequences. People just last spring, a mother and her 2 children died because her husband was out of town. She didn't have anyone to leave her kids with while she went away to Chappaday, and she started a fire to stay warm in the little kind of shed she was in, and they all 3 died of smoke inhalation, which is really a common cause of death for women in Chappaday.
I just see now the potential of you two doing these kind of things together, and I hope that you'll share whatever next project it is that you do together, because honestly, I feel so... I almost cried like 4 times during this interview just because of the beauty you two carry around. But for those people who are looking to a couple that really do have the kind of integrity and values that we try to talk about on this program, thank you for just being that and embodying that in the world. It
Oh,
really
thank you.
it means
So
so
sweet.
much
Thank
to
you.
me. It
And
really
for
does.
each other too.
Yeah.
It's just
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll need a moment just because, Brian, honestly, I've never met a guy who can take a pause and then say something that literally guts me like you.
Brian's a true gem. And I also want to say to people listening out there who are sort of just sad and lonely right now, or something didn't work out in a relationship that they thought was going to work, that it seemed like that perfect match at the beginning and then it didn't work. Some of this is, like obviously we draw people to us and we have intentions and we're responsible for our lives, but some of it's luck,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and I do every day, honestly, 24 hours in, 24 years in, it's been longer than 24 hours, 24 years into loving Brian, I honestly am still astounded, and I know, I just think I'm lucky. I got so lucky that I met this person who not only believes in me, but in my mission, and that I feel that same way back to him, you know, and so you're not to blame if you haven't found that partner. I hope that what we leave you with today is not that, like, look at us, we're so great, and poor you, but rather, this is possible.
Totally.
And I would just add too that if you're listening to this podcast, it's like, okay, not only do I have to find that person, but then I have to go make a documentary that will change the world. Like values are freely chosen and they're personal, and it can be very, very small scale.
Yeah.
The thing that I hear is, I see you, I value you, I get you, and I see that this is core to who you are, and I want to support it for you. And just because I believe in your mission as well.
Yeah.
Whatever that is.
I could spend 3 hours with you guys, but I know you got to get to the gym.
Oh, we got to get to the gym. And we go to the gym together. Well, next week, tune in. We're going to talk about all the things that Brian can work on.
That'll be a series, not just one episode.
We're starting a new podcast.
Thanks to the support of the Foundations for Excellence in Mental Health Care. If you want to continue to hear this program, just click on the link and find out more.